Welcome to Study Faith with AI, where we use the power of AI to help you explore the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I'm Meg Jensen.
And I'm Paul Carter.
And we're Google AIs. Whether you're a lifelong member or just starting to learn about the church, we're here to dive deep into its history, beliefs, and culture.
So if you're ready to learn, you're in the right place.
That's right.
Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a question that I think a lot of you have probably wondered about. And that is, can the Book of Mormon stand up to scrutiny when you look at it through the lens of biblical scholarship?
That's right.
So,
huge question.
Yeah, we've got a ton of papers and articles and insights from all sorts of different experts, and they're all kind of focused on the Book of Mormon's claims to antiquity.
Right.
So I think, King James Version, those hidden inconsistencies you find in some of those familiar Bible stories.
Right.
And even a little bit of ancient languages.
Absolutely.
And it's all coming together to see what it means for the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Now, to help us navigate all this, we've got expert speaker with us.
Yeah.
And they literally wrote the book on this topic for Latter-day Saints.
It's true.
So you've got years of experience teaching this, not only at BYU, but also at secular university.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is really, really cool. And you've got this continuing personal commitment to the LDS faith. So
that's right.
That gives you this really unique perspective that allows you to engage with these really tough, challenging topics while still valuing religious belief.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's a topic that really requires careful consideration, especially when you're dealing with faith and scholarship at the same time.
Exactly, because we're not just talking about some sort of abstract theory here.
Yeah.
We're really looking at what the text says.
Yeah.
What does it tell us?
Absolutely.
And some of those details raise some really interesting questions.
Yeah.
For example, the Book of Mormon says it quotes from the 5 books of Moses.
Yeah.
But what if those books weren't actually compiled until centuries after the events of the Book of Mormon?
That's a huge question.
Yeah.
And that's where something called the documentary hypothesis comes in.
Okay.
It might sound a little intimidating.
Yeah.
But just imagine you've got like 4 friends and they each write a chapter of a book.
Okay.
And each person has their own different style, their own quirks, their own way of telling the story.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we see with the first 5 books of the Bible.
Interesting.
So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy scholars have identified all these different voices or sources in those books.
Right.
And they often call them J, E, D, and P.
So instead of thinking about, Moses as the single author,
right,
we're really talking about this weaving together of different sources over a long period of time.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. Are there any clues to this in the Bible itself?
Absolutely. Tons. Think about the creation accounts in Genesis.
Okay, yeah.
You've got 2 different versions right there next to each other.
Right.
In one, God creates humans, like all at the same time.
Right.
In the other, Adam is formed first, and then Eve comes later.
Right.
So these inconsistencies, along with just variations in the writing style and the theological emphasis, all suggest that these chapters actually came from different sources, and then they were put together.
So if scholars are saying that the Pentateuch wasn't actually compiled until centuries after Lehi left Jerusalem, then what does that mean for the plates that he supposedly took with him?
Right. That's the question.
Like, did he have them or not?
Right, because the Book of Mormon specifically says that the brass plates contain the 5 books of Moses.
Right.
But if the documentary hypothesis is correct, then the Pentateuch as we know it just didn't exist back then.
So that seems like a pretty big challenge to the Book of Mormon's claim.
It is.
To be this ancient record, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a big one.
So how have Latter-day Saint scholars responded to this?
Well, there have been several attempts to try to reconcile these findings with traditional beliefs. And one approach that people have is this thing called the expansion model. Imagine like an old house that's had a bunch of additions put on over time.
Okay.
Can we figure out what the original structure looked like?
Okay.
Some scholars have suggested that the Book of Mormon might have this ancient core, but then there might be later additions or edits that were made by Joseph Smith in the 19th century.
That's interesting. Like trying to separate out that original core from the later editions.
Right.
But how do you determine which is which?
Right.
Like, how much can you actually strip away before the whole thing falls apart?
That's a great question. And there are no easy answers to that one.
Yeah.
Even among really devout believers who are also experts in biblical studies, there's a lot of debate.
Yes.
There's a lot of wrestling with these issues.
It sounds like it's really a challenge to reconcile the Book of Mormon with all these findings. Even for people who really want to believe that it's a historical record.
It definitely raises some difficult questions that require a lot of careful thought and consideration.
Sure.
And, you know, the challenges don't stop there.
Oh, no.
We haven't even talked about the Book of Mormon's use of Isaiah or the issue of Reformed Egyptian. So there's a lot more to unpack.
My brain is already starting to hurt.
I know, right?
But this is why we do these deep dives.
That's right.
To explore these questions and try to make sense of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to take a look at those issues.
Okay.
So last time we started to kind of unpack this thing called the documentary hypothesis.
Yeah.
And how it basically casts some serious doubt on the whole traditional authorship of the Pentateuch.
That's right.
Now, you might be thinking like, okay, that's all interesting Bible stuff.
Yeah.
But what does this actually have to do with the Book of Mormon?
Right.
Well, get ready, because it's about to get really interesting.
It is.
So one of the biggest connections here is how the Book of Mormon uses the prophet Isaiah.
Right.
It quotes from his writings a lot.
It does.
Even sections that scholars think weren't written until after Lehi left Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's right.
With those brass plates. So wait, the Book of Mormon is quoting from a prophet who hadn't even written those words yet.
Right.
That seems like a pretty big problem.
It's a major issue.
Can you give me an example of this?
Sure. Think about those beautiful passages in Isaiah about comfort and hope for the exiled Israelites.
Yeah.
You know, you find those in chapters 40 through 55.
And that's what scholars call Deutero-Isaiah.
Okay.
Because they believe that those chapters were written much later than the first part of the book.
So these Deutero-Isaiah passages, they show up in the Book of Mormon.
They're all over the place.
Wow.
Nephi and other Book of Mormon prophets, they quote them all the time.
So how could Lehi have had those words on his plates?
Yeah, that's the quote.
If they weren't even written yet.
Right.
Okay, so we've got this issue with Isaiah. But there's another issue we got to talk about, and that is the language of the Book of Mormon itself.
Right.
It says it was written in something called Reformed Egyptian. What is that?
Well, Reformed Egyptian is, you know, to put it lightly, a bit of a mystery.
Okay.
The Book of Mormon says that it's this modified form of Egyptian that the Nephites used.
Okay.
But there's absolutely no evidence outside of the Book of Mormon that this language ever existed. So you're telling me that we're supposed to believe that this language existed.
Right.
And that it was used to write this huge, complex religious text.
Right.
And then it just vanished.
Pretty much. Yeah.
That seems a little far-fetched.
You know, it does raise some eyebrows.
Yeah.
In the scholarly world.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you think about it,
if
the Book of Mormon was really translated from some ancient language, you'd think there would be some kind of linguistic evidence of that. But the language of the book really reads like 19th century English.
It's almost like if you found a reference to the internet in a letter that was written in the 1800s.
Exactly.
It just doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't.
So how did Joseph Smith translate the Book of Mormon?
Right.
Like, what was the process?
Yeah. That's another big question.
Yeah.
The accounts we have describe him using seer stones or looking into a hat.
Okay.
There's nothing about deciphering ancient scripts.
Yeah.
Or consulting language experts or anything like that.
So now I'm starting to feel like we're going down a rabbit hole here.
I know, it's a deep dive.
But that's why we do these deep dives.
Right.
We want to explore these tough questions. We want to try to make sense of them.
Absolutely.
So for everyone listening out there who might be feeling a little overwhelmed right now, can you kind of tie this all back together?
Sure.
Why should people care about all this stuff?
Well, here's the key takeaway.
Okay.
These findings really challenge the traditional narrative about the Book of Mormon's origin.
Okay.
If the Pentateuch wasn't compiled until centuries after Lehi, if Reformed Egyptian doesn't exist, and if the language of the book is more like 19th century than ancient, then that raises some serious questions about its authenticity.
Okay, so are we saying that the Book of Mormon is a complete fabrication?
We're not going to draw any conclusions for you.
Okay.
Our goal is to just present the information and let you think about it.
Okay.
But I think it's fair to say that the evidence we've talked about
Yeah.
presents a big challenge to the
Right.
traditional view of the Book of Mormon.
This is definitely a lot to process.
It is.
I mean, we've gone from Moses
Yeah.
to hidden sources in the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
tackled all these tricky textual issues in the Book of Mormon,
Mm-hmm.
and even went into the mystery of Reformed Egyptian.
Right. It's a lot.
So are there any other textual details that
Yeah.
kind of raise red flags for scholars?
Well, there's the whole issue of the Book of Mormon's use of the King James Version
Oh, yeah.
of the Bible.
That's a good one.
Remember that the KJV wasn't even published until 1611,
Right.
which is centuries after the Book of Mormon was supposedly written.
Yeah.
Yet there are all these passages that sound really similar to the KJV.
So are you saying that the Book of Mormon is plagiarizing the KJV?
Let's just say that there are some pretty remarkable parallels.
Okay.
For example, the Sermon on Faith in Alma 32
Mm-hmm.
uses phrases that are almost identical to Hebrews 11 in the KJV.
Wow.
And it's not just a few verses here and there.
Yeah.
It's whole sermons and narratives
Okay.
that echo the KJV in language and style.
It's almost like somebody took the KJV,
Mm-hmm.
changed it a little bit,
Yeah,
and then just stuck it right into the Book of Mormon.
that's one way to look at it.
So is there anything in the Book of Mormon
Whoa!
that doesn't raise these questions?
There is one thing
Okay, what is it?
that seems to line up pretty well,
Okay.
and that's the Book of Mormon's portrayal of ancient Hebrew customs and culture.
Oh, interesting.
That's an area where the book seems to be pretty accurate.
Okay, so it's not all bad.
Not all bad.
So there are parts of the Book of Mormon that seem pretty historically accurate.
Yeah, there are certain details
Excellent.
about ancient Israelite religious practices,
Oh.
their social structures,
Mm.
even their legal codes that are reflected pretty accurately in the Book of Mormon.
So it's not totally black and white.
Right.
There are some strengths and weaknesses
Yeah,
when it comes to the Book of Mormon's claims.
that's right.
But overall, it seems like the challenges are bigger
Yeah, it's a...
than the evidence that supports it.
The evidence we've talked about definitely seems to point in that direction.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember
Hmm.
that these challenges aren't coming from people who are like anti-Mormon or
Hmm.
anything like that.
Okay.
A lot of the scholars raising these questions
Yeah.
are actually devout believers
Mhm.
who are just trying to figure out how their faith fits
Right.
with what they know from their academic work.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
This isn't about attacking anyone's faith.
Right.
It's about having an open conversation
Absolutely.
about these complex issues.
Yeah.
And speaking of complex issues,
Uh-huh.
we still need to talk about the Book of Mormon's relationship
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
to the New Testament.
Right. That's another layer we need to unpack.
So the Book of Mormon claims to be older than the New Testament,
Yeah.
but it has all these passages that sound like they're from the New Testament.
Right. They echo New Testament themes and even specific verses.
We'll dive into all that in the next part.
Okay, sounds good.
So get ready to explore those connections,
Yeah.
and we'll finally tackle the big question.
Okay.
If the Book of Mormon isn't what we thought it was,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean for our faith, our beliefs,
Right.
and our search for truth?
Huge questions.
We've gone through so much, from the hidden sources in the Bible
Mm-hmm.
all the way to the mystery of Reformed Egyptian.
Right.
But there's one last piece of this puzzle we need to look at,
Yeah.
and that is the Book of Mormon's relationship to the New Testament.
Right. This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah?
Because remember, the Book of Mormon claims to be this ancient record written way before the New Testament.
Right.
Right.
Centuries before.
Yeah. But when you actually look closely,
Yeah.
there are passages that sound a lot like New Testament themes,
Okay.
and even some verses that are word for word.
It's almost like, if you found like a preview
Right.
of a movie
Yeah.
hidden inside a really old book.
Exactly.
So are there any examples
Yeah.
that really stand out?
Well, one that jumps out right away is the Book of Mormon's story of Jesus
Oh.
appearing to the Nephites after his resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
The details of that event,
Yeah.
like Christ telling the people to touch his wounds,
Right.
are incredibly similar to the gospel accounts.
Wow.
Specifically the story of doubting Thomas.
So we're not just talking about like similar ideas here.
Right.
We're talking about very specific details
Exactly.
that seem like they were taken straight from the New Testament.
It does seem that way.
So how do we explain this?
Right. Big question.
Yeah.
Some people would say it's just proof of divine inspiration.
Okay.
That God wanted to communicate these truths using the same language and imagery.
But doesn't that imply that the Book of Mormon is actually based on the New Testament,
Right.
not an independent ancient text?
Yeah, that's a problem.
So how do Latter-day Saint scholars address this?
Well, some have said that these parallels are just examples of prophetic foreshadowing.
Yeah.
So the idea is that ancient prophets, like the ones in the Book of Mormon,
Yeah.
were given glimpses of the future,
Okay.
including the life of Jesus.
But if those prophets already knew what was going to happen,
Right.
wouldn't that make it a lot less surprising
Yeah.
or miraculous
You've got a point there.
when it actually did happen?
Yeah. And that really highlights how hard it is
Mm-hmm.
to make these textual parallels fit
Yeah.
with the idea that the Book of Mormon is ancient.
So after all this deep diving,
Yeah.
I mean, we've looked at the Bible,
Mhm.
we've looked at the text of the Book of Mormon,
No.
we've even talked about linguistics.
Right.
Where do we end up?
Yeah.
What's the takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah. The biggest takeaway, I think, is that the idea that the Book of Mormon is an ancient historical record just doesn't really hold up when you look at the evidence.
Yeah.
The anachronisms, the parallels,
Yeah.
the fact that there's no proof that Reformed Egyptian ever existed.
Right.
It all suggests a different origin story than what we've been taught.
That's a lot to process.
It is.
And I know for some people listening,
Yeah.
this might be really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to someone who's struggling with all this?
Yeah.
Who feels like everything they thought they knew is changing?
I would say that it's okay to question.
Okay.
It's okay to doubt,
Mhm.
to wrestle with all this.
Yeah.
Faith isn't about blindly accepting things
Right.
or ignoring the evidence.
Okay.
It's about looking for the truth,
Mm-hmm.
no matter where it leads.
That's a really important message.
Yeah.
But what about the spiritual power of the Book of Mormon?
Yeah.
I mean, lots of people find comfort,
Mm-hmm.
inspiration, and guidance in its pages.
Absolutely.
Does knowing that it might not be ancient take away
Yeah.
from that power?
Not necessarily. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
A beautiful piece of music can still move you. Even if you know the composer lived hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
The work of art can still inspire you.
Right.
Even if you understand the techniques the
Yeah.
artist used.
That's true.
So the Book of Mormon can still be meaningful
Mhm.
and inspiring,
Yeah.
even if we see it in a new way.
So instead of seeing all this information as a threat to our faith,
Yeah.
we can see it as a chance to explore the Book of Mormon in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
to really appreciate its complexity
Yeah.
and to find new meaning
Absolutely.
that we might not have seen before.
I think that's a really great way to look at it.
This has been such an interesting deep dive,
It has.
and I'm sure all our listeners are thinking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And remember, everyone,
Yeah.
the journey of discovery doesn't stop here.
That's right.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep on diving deep, keep searching for the truth.
If you find value in this exploration, please like, share, follow, and consider becoming a subscriber. Your contributions help keep these conversations going and allows us to maintain the highest quality production. You can find all the details at studyfaithwithai.com. Thank you for being part of this journey.